Good morning, everyone. Sorry I was a little late. So I'm Dr. Linda Colley. I'm GP in the area and clinical director for Portsmouth Place of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Integrated Care Board. Limited public seating has been made available. However, this meeting is also being webcast to allow the public to attend remotely if they so wish. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to webcast this meeting. So, for safety information, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble in the turning circle at the end of King Henry Street, past the University's Park building. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, including those making deputations. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. So if that is for yourselves, please do make it clear. Please can everyone use the microphones, and you can move them to be spoken into, and remember to switch them off when you have finished speaking. So I'm going to start with the introductions for everyone. So if we start over.
Kelly Nash from Strategy Unit of the City Council.
Matt Gummerson, Head of Strategic Health and Strategic Intelligence and Research, Public Health.
Sam Graves, Community Safety Analyst.
I thought you were going to ask Anna.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
I'm Gerald Van Jackson, Leader of the Council in Portsmouth.
And if we start at the back row, please.
Caroline Hopper, Strategy.
Ros Hartley, Integrated Care Board for Hampshire and Isle of Wight.
Morning all, David Williams, Chief Executive.
Morning, Alistair Snell, Deputy Chief Operating Officer, Solent.
Sarah Daly, Director of Children and Families Education.
Natasha Edmonds, Director of Corporate Services, Portsmouth City Council.
David Goosey, Chair of the Portsmouth Adult Safeguarding Board.
Jo York, Managing Director, Portsmouth for the ICB and the City Council.
Morning colleagues, Andy Biddle, Director of Adult Social Care at Portsmouth City Council.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Mark Orchard, Chief Financial Officer at Portsmouth Hospitals, here for Penny Emirates, Chief Executive.
Roger Banterbury, Chairperson, Healthwatch Portsmouth.
Alan Noble, Public Health Principal, Public Health.
Dominique Latouze, Assistant Director of Public Health.
Helen Atkinson, Director of Public Health.
Good morning, colleagues. Diane Sherlock, CEO of Age UK Portsmouth and representing the voluntary sector.
Lorna Reevely, the Hive Chief Officer.
Matthew Williamson, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Social Care and Co-Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board.
Terry Norton, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight.
Councillor Lewis Gosling from Cockney Ward.
Thank you, everyone. So we've had some apologies for absence from Councillor Adinaran, Councillor Horton, or she says she may be late, so we may still expect her. Superintendent Claire Jenkins, Penny Emirate, but we have Mark here, Francis Mullin, Paul Riddle, and Susanna Rosenberg. So for today's agenda, are there any declarations of interest that need to be reported? No. Lovely. So we'll move on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 21st of September. Any accuracy issues first of all? So if we start on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11. Is everyone happy with those minutes? Are we happy to approve? Oh, yeah.
Just a matter arising from them, if you wouldn't mind, Linda.
No, that's fine.
On page either 6 or 10, depending on your numbering of them, we did the pharmaceutical needs assessment. But since then, my understanding is that the pharmacy on Elm Grove has been approved for closure, even though we said that we didn't want the number of pharmacies to fall. What are we able to do, because we were very specific in what we passed to say the number that there should be, what are we able to do to try to make sure that doesn't happen again? Because if we're increasingly relying on pharmacists, but they're increasingly shutting, then the pressure on primary care becomes greater and greater. I'm sure Matt has a knowledgeable answer.
Matt.
Yeah, I mean, as you're aware, there's not a huge amount that we can do in that it's not our decision about pharmacy closures. However, also unfortunately, the timing of that particular closure, effectively the closure was based on the previous pharmaceutical needs assessment, because at the time the closure was applied for, our new one hadn't been approved. So the recommendation in the new one that we don't want to see any more was not a factor in the decision making around that. I'm not suggesting that it necessarily would have made the decision different had it been. What we can now do, and what we will have to do, is issue a supplementary statement to our pharmaceutical needs assessment that reflects the fact that those closures have now taken place, and that there are now closures that have happened since we said we didn't want to see any more closures. So there's a decision then to be taken as part of that supplementary statement that could now say we believe there are now gaps as a result of those closures. That's a piece of work that we haven't yet undertaken. We were only notified of the closure in the last few weeks, but we will consider that and bring that back to this board as a supplementary statement.
I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Were there any other actions that were needed? No, so we're happy to approve those minutes then? Yeah, fantastic, thank you. So moving on to our first item, we've got violence against women and girls, and Caroline is going to present this.
Thank you. This is a noting paper that's been prepared in partnership with Hampshire Constabulary. It's been presented 2 days before White Ribbon Day on Friday the 25th of November. The White Ribbon campaign is a global movement working to end male violence against women and girls. Violence against women and girls in all its forms can be life-altering for its victims, and it's important to note that the term VORG refers to all victims regardless of their gender. However, we must acknowledge the gendered nature of the issue, and women remain disproportionately affected. In 2021, the National VORG Strategy, Domestic Abuse Strategy and Action Plan and refreshed National Statement of Expectations brought together the full spectrum of VORG crimes for the first time. Whilst locally data is showing a positive increase in awareness of unhealthy and abusive relationships, domestic abuse continues to be the largest driver of violent crime, accounting for 44% of assaults recorded by police. Reporting of sexual offences has increased since 1920, although the board is asked to note that this will be driven in part by some things like improved reporting. The paper outlines 3 key work streams underway in Portsmouth to address VORG: the police tactical plan, the domestic abuse strategy and the Safer Streets agenda. Working in partnership, raising awareness and encouraging a community response run through each of these. The work streams are connected operationally and through governance structures. The OPCC, Office for Police Crime Commissioners VORG Task Group, is bringing partners together at a regional level. There are some emerging successes. The response to domestic abuse has been strengthened by combining 3 separate contracts into one. Venues across the city have been trained as we stand together, safe spaces to respond to those experiencing harassment and sexual crime. Hundreds of people in the nighttime economy have been trained to recognise and respond to issues. Op-rigging patrol strategy within the nighttime economy has enabled large numbers of vulnerable people to be safeguarded each night, and community protection notice warnings are being used to manage repeat perpetrators. The Safer Streets programme more widely has enabled situational improvements to footpaths and public spaces across the city. The board is asked to note that there is still potential for more connected response, and this will be considered alongside the review of existing plans, and that we will continue to find ways to bring in other relevant agendas, including education, regeneration, culture and leisure, to ensure we respond to this agenda with maximum effect.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
Thank you very much. Just happy to add that in terms of the OPCC's drive to bring partners together around VALC, we've got our annual VALC conference on Friday. I'm sure that some of you have been invited, but it's not something that we're live streaming because obviously we want it to be quite an environment where people can speak freely. But for those attending, please do report back, bring back the learnings of the day, and do obviously feed into us with any ideas and feedback from that. But that's on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
I'm sure Karen will have the details of it, but on Friday we're doing the raising of the white flag day outside the Guildhall, I think at 9:15. Everybody is very welcome to come as a very public symbol of the support for the campaign. So do come along if you would like. Is that right, Caroline?
That's absolutely correct.
And I was shocked to find it's not in my diary, so I've just sent an email to Nicole to remind her.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. And I think it's another example of where you work together, you'll definitely achieve more, won't we? And this sounds like a really positive paper, so thank you. We're moving on to the Community Safety Survey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm introducing items 5 and 6 at the same time. So we're looking at the findings from the Community Safety Survey and also the updates to the strategic assessment of crime and social behaviour, reoffending, substance misuse. I'll briefly introduce the two reports. Sam's then going to present the findings from both those pieces of work as a presentation, which will be slightly more interesting than me talking, and then we'll come back to the recommendations in the two reports at the end together. So both these pieces of work, as I say, led by Sam Graves, who's the Community Safety Analyst within the Public Health Intelligence team. It's a role funded through what we call the Safe Portsmouth Partnership pot, so from our previous Safe Portsmouth Partnership work, which is in part funded by contributions from the responsible authorities represented here around this table, so we're grateful for that continued support. The two reports, the first one presents the findings from the biannual Community Safety Survey. The second looks at the strategic assessment updates. That's a statutory requirement to produce a strategic assessment. We do it every 3 years in full, and then we do an annual update just to kind of review the data that's changed in the previous year and identify if there's any priorities that need to be updated or anything that needs to change. So I'll hand over to Sam, who'll talk you through the slides.
Thank you, Matt. Next slide. Thank you. So, as Matt said, I'll be giving an overview of key crime trends and the key findings from the Community Safety Survey. It makes sense to do them together, as actually the survey is our key way of sort of consulting with residents, and it actually feeds into the update that we do. Also, for clarity, we've compared the financial year of 2021-22 with 2019-20, and that's because the levels of many crimes were lower during 2021 as a result of behaviour changes associated with the COVID-19 restrictions. Thank you. So the graph that you can see on this slide shows the victimisation reported to our local community safety survey in purple along the bottom. And you can see that actually that level has been pretty stable over the last 3 surveys, which sort of represents 6 years worth of data, because we do the survey biannually. Police recorded crime is plotted in the dark blue, and for the years where we carried out the community safety survey, and that shows an upward trend since 2014. And there's been just under 10% increase in police recorded crime since 2019-20. But when we look at other data sources, such as our local survey and also the crime survey for England and Wales, they suggest a stable trend in overall levels of crime, so both locally and nationally. So this leads us to conclude, and also by considering other data sources, that the increase in police recorded crime overall is likely to be driven by changes in the way that police have been recording crimes, some new offences over time, and also victims having more confidence to come forward and report crimes. And some different offences are also affected greatly by police activity, such as drug offences. Behind the overall levels, the picture's a little bit more complex, but overall we've seen that people are increasingly relying on online platforms for work, shopping and socialising, and this has increased opportunities for criminals to commit cybercrime and also exploit people. Cybercrime can allow criminals to reach a much larger geographical area, literally almost anywhere in the world, and also reduce the chances of being caught for the crimes they commit. The Crime Survey for England and Wales has found that cybercrime has increased substantially over the last 2 years, and data from our local survey also supports that finding. At the same time, we've seen reductions in theft offences over the last decade, both nationally and locally. And this is likely to be a result of many things, including increased surveillance. More people have their own personal surveillance, their Ring cameras, things like that. People are very quick to take videos and photos on their phones. There's also fast depreciation in the value of technological devices as well. And then this is coupled with the low-risk opportunities that are now available for online fraud and theft offences. With regard to violence, overall, we think that the picture's pretty stable. Police recorded violence with injury offences seem to have stabilised now, and also hospital admissions for violent assaults and alleged assaults have been stable in recent years as well. But we have seen some increases in some particular types of police recorded violent crime. So there has been increases in police recorded sexual offences, domestic abuse and stalking and harassment offences. But because we know that a substantial number of victims do not report these types of crimes, it's really difficult to unpick whether these increases are showing an increased willingness of victims to come forward and report to the police, better recording of those crimes by police, or whether there has been a genuine increase in those types of crime. Now I'm going to talk briefly about the Community Safety Survey. We've been doing this survey since 1997 in one way or another, but since 2014 we've conducted the survey in-house. We've recruited, trained and supervised students from the University of Portsmouth to carry out the fieldwork. And having the survey running for this amount of time gives us some really great long-term trend data about the experiences of our residents. It doesn't mean that doesn't rely on them reporting those incidents to the police or other services. Levels of antisocial behaviour have been relatively stable since 2014. The types of antisocial behaviour which are causing the biggest problem for our residents are people hanging around, people using and supplying drugs, and noise in the street. And actually, most of those are similar to previous surveys, although we have seen an increase in people reporting that they're seeing people using and supplying drugs. The biggest increase we've seen is in traffic-related antisocial behaviour. 5% of participants actually mentioned e-scooters, and that's a new issue which hasn't been mentioned previously. Just over half of participants said that there were areas of Portsmouth where they felt unsafe or they avoided, in particular Somerstown and Buckland. But that's actually been the case for the last 20 years that we've been running the survey, so there's been no change there, and it's largely due to bad reputation. But there are also concerns about groups or gangs hanging around, dodgy people and drug use or drug dealing. Commercial Road, particularly at night, and Southsea are increasingly becoming areas that people avoid or feel unsafe. This comes back to the graph that you saw on the original slide. I've already talked a lot about this. But the surveys found that most types of crime reduced or remained stable, and the reductions were offset by a substantial increase in online crime. We started asking about knife crime in the last survey to link in with violence reduction unit work, and we found that this time more participants thought that knife crime was a problem than in the previous survey in 2020, but the experience of knife crime remained stable. This time we were also asked to give a particular focus to the safety of women and girls as part of the VORG work that Caroline was talking about earlier. We slightly adapted one of the questions and we included an extra line of explanation encouraging participants to tell us where they felt unsafe, why and what could help them feel safer. We found this was really similar to the responses from men, but that women were more likely to feel unsafe than men, and particularly in the city centre at night. The reasons they gave were similar too, although women were more likely to mention a high crime rate and poor lighting. And when we did the training of our students, we spent a lot of time talking to them about the importance of encouraging the participants to give exact locations. And I know for myself, when I did some surveys as well, very few participants were happy or able to give particular streets or alleys or locations, and actually instead just referred to neighbourhood, sort of larger areas. This is a real shame, because if specific locations are mentioned, it's easier to do target work. But it does suggest that actually people's perceptions are more around neighbourhoods rather than actually that one particular space. So we also asked what we could do to help women feel safer in the areas they mentioned, and we did get a lot of feedback, which is available if you contact me, but they can be broadly broken down into the themes that you can see on the screen. So now I'll just do a quick review of the recommended community safety priorities. If you want to take a minute to just read through rather than reading out. So although most of the priorities remain unchanged, it's recommended that we actually add in violence against women and girls specifically within the tackling violence priority to reflect the national and local focus on the issue. So the first priority was tackling violent crime. It's still the largest known, domestic abuse is still the largest known driver for violence. And as previously mentioned, we have seen increases in police recorded sexual offences, stalking, harassment and domestic abuse offences. While we can't unpick whether this reflects a genuine increase, some national research by Sylvia Walby suggests that some victims or survivors of domestic abuse may be experiencing more severe and frequent abuse and violence. And actually, this is supported by local data, which shows an increase in repeat perpetrators and also an increase in those linked to high-risk offences. Meanwhile, we've also seen a reduction in the number of charges for domestic abuse offences and the number of cases related to domestic abuse heard in court. So this has really highlighted for us the need to focus on holding medium and high-risk perpetrators to account. And while the volume of violent offences resulting in injury has been fairly stable, we have seen numerically small, but still seen an increase in knife-enabled serious violence. There was an increase of 19 offences over the whole of the year compared with 2019-20. And while knife-enabled violence accounts for a small proportion of violent crimes, so about 1%, these are potentially high-harm crimes. And also the perception of knife crime being a problem has also increased, so a continued focus on knife crime is advised. Number 2 is about tackling drug-related harm. So increasingly, residents who've participated in our community safety survey have been telling us that they're witnessing drug misuse in their area, and levels are much higher than we saw pre the 2020 survey. It's also the second most pressing issue for residents, ASB issue. I'm going to let Alan tell you more about combating drug works later on, because that's his presentation. So if you go on to 3. Early identification of and interventions with children and young people at risk. There hasn't been any additional analysis for this because it was just a brief update, but the consequences of childhood adverse experiences and the importance of protective factors are recognised, and therefore it's recommended that this priority continues. The same for priority 4 about improving accessibility and capacity mental health provision. There hasn't been any additional analysis on this priority either, but it is recognised that financial stress caused by the cost of living crisis could have an additional impact for some of our residents. And currently the Public Health Intelligence team is putting together a dashboard which will monitor aspects that may be impacted by the cost of living crisis, and that information will soon be available. And the final priority is about increasing the awareness of cyber-related harm. So I've already mentioned about the increases we've seen both locally and nationally in levels of cybercrime, and this is actually likely to present a permanent shift with more offenders taking advantage of these opportunities online, particularly around theft and exploitation. So there's a need for partners to understand how this could affect their service users, particularly those that might be vulnerable to exploitation. Right, and so that's the end of the priorities. If anybody hasn't seen the previous full strategic assessment for 2021, that's available on the Safer Portsmouth Partnership website. And when this has been approved, the update has been approved, that will also be on there. And the Community Safety Survey full report is also available on that website. Thank you.
That's great, thank you, Sam. So in terms of the recommendations from the two reports, they're essentially that you use both the findings from the Community Safety Survey and the update to the strategic assessment in your relevant plans, and then in the second report, item 6, that we agree the changed the additional focus on violence against women and girls in set out in 1.3 for that first priority. We've, within the council, gone out and talked to all of our directorates about these findings and how they can be used by directorates within their work, recognising that violence is everybody's responsibility, crime is everybody's responsibility. We're going out to talk to the police about these findings soon, and I'd reiterate the offer that if any of you have forums in which it would be useful to discuss these things in more detail, then I'm very happy for myself or Sam to come out and talk to you about those.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Gerald?
Thanks, I thought that was very interesting. I'd quite like to suggest one additional thing that we should try to have a go at, because it seems to me that fear of crime is as important sometimes in restricting people's lives as crime itself. And I just wonder whether we could have something that about making sure that people feel safe in their communities or safe when they're going around the city. And I think that's something that both the police, the council, probably everybody can work at. And I think it covers a range of different things, but including the one that was mentioned about people illegal using of scooters around the city, because I know that causes a great deal of concern to many more elderly residents who get frightened of being knocked off their feet. But I think we just need to be conscious that the fear of crime imprisons people in their homes, and it's sometimes as problematic as the reality. Although I hate to sound like the Daily Mail.
Thank you, Chair. No, and thank you to Councillor Vernon Jackson for his comments. I think, realistically, I think we need to look at, there's some work to be done around promoting, crime stats and being a bit more transparent with this kind of data, because whilst I hear the comments, I think the reality is what we're told is the crimes that most people are likely to fall victim to are fraud and online crimes. But in terms of the crimes that police attend, it's domestics, it's domestic abuse, and we're going to need to, I think, maybe be quite honest with and transparent with those stats, so that, of course people are frustrated about people driving over 20 miles an hour in their communities. Of course people are frustrated about e-scooters, but the police are dealing with high harm situations. They're going out and dealing with rapes and murders and all of that sort of stuff. And I think if we're a little bit more honest without causing too much fear in communities, if we're a bit honest about the work that the police are doing and what they're dealing with, people may feel a little bit more easy when they get frustrated about an e-scooter. And, we're looking at stats that say that there are 1 in 10 know of somebody that carries a knife. Now, if you were to ask people, do you want your police officers to go and confiscate knives, or do you want them to challenge those on e-scooters? I think the picture would be quite clear. However, in terms of trust and confidence in policing, I think there's a fair comment, and also around police visibility, which is why Uplift is helping in a huge way, and I think it's important to tell you where we're at in terms of Uplift, if that's okay, Chair. So of the 498 that the government have given Hampshire and the Isle of Wight for additional police officers, and that's a net gain, that's including those that retire and what have you. We've obviously pledged 600. That image is looking more like 637 because we're going above and beyond for those who may, not enjoy the force and want to move on, that natural kind of progression. And we've actually asked for more. The government's saying, no, we're not going to give you your extra share at the moment because, we need to make sure that they go elsewhere as well. But we've hit that 498 and we'll have the 600 in place by March of next year, which means that we can now say to the force, don't just become a high harm force. We now want you to go out and look at the category 2s, category 3 situations, the e-scooters and the various other things. A commitment, of course, has been made to 100% attendance of residential burglaries, and that will help. But I think partnership working is important, and we often have the police contacted around 20 miles an hour, people driving faster than that. We often have them contacted around various things that I think partners can play their role in. Realistically, is it the police's job to put road signs up and bumps on the roads? No, that kind of comes under highways and local authorities and things like that. Same with lighting of parks. Of course the police will enforce, but whose job is it to light parks? And I think it's important to say that we have got an ASB task force. The Commissioner does have pots of money that we can put out to councils, to charities, to neighbourhood watch groups, etc. if there are some small things that they want topping up with, the odd speed sign here and there, the Z-gate and various things, and we do welcome those applications coming in. But I'm really, really pleased that the ICS, for one, are starting to look at crime prevention and put that on their agenda and various other things. But I do think it's a partnership approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Diane.
Thank you so much, and thank you for explaining that. And I'm 100% with you and 100% supportive of the police and police actions and prioritising the right ones. The only thing I would gently request is a reserved approach to scams. One of the things we're trying to do very much at the moment, and there are digital champions all over the city, is encourage people that have anxieties about going out to socialise differently. They also have to live differently to access their money, to access food, etc., etc. And the biggest battle we have is being terrified they're going to be scammed, despite the fact that we're teaching how to be on the internet safely. That fear is stopping so many people from participating that way. It's our forever battle, I'm afraid. So there's a fine line between, yes, completely agree, we all want knives off the street, and not terrifying the public about being on the internet. So thank you.
Thank you. Yep.
You're absolutely right, and it's a difficult one for us, if I'm honest, because it's realistically fighting cybercrime is something that happens from behind a computer. And the public want police visibility. They want to see their bobbies. They want to make sure they get a good service. And I think there is a perception, dare I say, from the public that cybercrime is something that's dealt with up in London in an office somewhere, and it's not really a local issue. So I think there is certainly some work to be done around education. We certainly need to look at, actually the biggest volume is things like Amazon packages not arriving, where it's to you and I only maybe £5, £10, we may not chase it, but that leads to billions, if you look at the amount. So certainly some work to be done around education and cybercrime, and we'll certainly take that away and look at that in terms of when we're rewriting our priorities for potentially a second term and things like that. Thank you.
I haven't got my microphone on. My question was linking into the fear. So in here it says Somerstown and Buckland are areas where people most felt unsafe and were avoided. What do the people of Somerstown and Buckland think? Can you get that level of data in terms of how do they perceive their areas?
Yes, we can actually see who's suggested what areas, and that is something that I can look into and go sort of beneath. I've got a feeling it will be people who don't live in Somerstown and Buckland.
And that helps drive inequality in those areas and things, isn't it? And it's how we can raise the profile of these areas across the city, and that's all of our responsibility. So, thank you. Was there any other comments or questions? No? Lovely. So we're moving on to the Hampshire Race Plan, and Paul's going to lead that one. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. So I just want to give a brief overview to the board on the Police National Race Action Plan. The action plan has been launched by the MPCC and the College of Policing, and it's designed to improve policing for black people. It has the support of all 43 chief constables across the country, and it's something that policing has been attempting to address since the Scarman report in 1981 and the McPherson report in 98. And unfortunately, we've had limited impact, and we've got to accept that. So it sets out changes across policing to improve outcomes for black people who work within the organisation, interact or are affected by policing, and to improve overall trust and confidence. The fact is, nationally, you are disproportionately more likely, if black, to have police powers used on you, and Hampshire reflects that. It's an awkward truth that we've been really transparent about, and it's something that we're passionate to address. So we also are still not an employer of choice for black people, and we're an outlier as a public service, and that's an important goal for us to reflect the communities we serve. There's 4 main work streams for the plan. It's about being represented, not over-policed, involved, a real focus on engagement and inclusion when we make decisions, and to not underprotect black people. There's a PowerPoint that I will share with members of the board, and I'll plan a further conversation across the partnership to look at the wider issues and develop a partnership response for the city to see if this is wider than policing for Portsmouth. It's a priority for the constabulary, and if you're happy, we'll keep it on the agenda and update at the next board progress.
Yeah, I think we'd all welcome that. Is there any comments now or questions?
I will add some to it if that's okay, and just to pay credit to some of the work that the force is already doing. I know that the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Police Force have actually had national recognition and national awards for their diversity and inclusion work, so that's really great. And there are some extra things that the force are doing in terms of making sure that young black teenagers make sure that they get legal aid when they're arrested, access to solicitors and things like that, which didn't happen before, and looking at strip search data and things like that, and making sure that there's lots of is equal there. So lots of work going on. The force is recognised as being a leader in this area, but of course always more to do.
And I'm just assuming now, but there's good links in with the schools and colleges, are there, in terms of future job opportunities, apprenticeships, etc.?
Right, there is. However, it's difficult, isn't it, in education? And I don't want to paint a hugely broad picture, but there are areas where there are schools who are still have a very, very closed door approach to external agencies, and I think that may be because of academisation or whatever it is. Perhaps it's chasing league tables and what have you, but I think it's increasingly hard for police officers to get into that education space in some areas, not always, but in some areas. So what you're left with is, I think, overworked teachers who teach potentially citizenship, PSHRE as a second or third subject using generic resources, maybe not doing them justice because it's not their priority, if we're honest. And I do worry that is leaving gaps in education, and certainly around policing and county lines and all of those sort of things, certainly race equality. Fundamentally, we want more black police officers, those from BAME backgrounds in the force. Getting into schools and promoting that is key to that, but there is sometimes a bit of a closed door policy. We have got, the force appointed 6 new schools liaison officers, so we're going to keep track on the work that they're doing and do all we can to find out, are we going into the right schools, and are they having trouble getting into schools, and if they are, let us know and we can do some work to try and work with those schools. But it is an area within education that I think is missing. I still think teachers are best placed to identify children who are overly sexualised or potentially involved in gang culture or bleary-eyed or come in with brand new trainers often and therefore maybe involved in county lines and what have you. But there is lots of work to be done, I think, with education and making sure that we promote positive trust and confidence in policing among young people within schools, because it's the best forum to get them, I think.
Yes, Sarah wants to come in.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to come in terms of that education piece. We have excellent relationships with our schools and certainly with the Academy Trusts in Portsmouth and through the Portsmouth Education Partnership. So if there are any challenges in terms of that communication or accessing schools, please come to me or Mike Stoneman But absolutely, I think that our schools would be more than welcoming to engage in this and to support this work. And from conversations just this week, I know that they would relish any support that they can have. So certainly outside of this meeting, we can take that forward and ensure that we're getting the right access to the right schools.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Oh, Diane.
Just a quick one. Wanted to tell a good story about police and school interaction. Last summer, or last year, I was a carer to my granddaughter, and on one particular occasion, my son, who was a special constable, came with me, and 2 police officers were just out the front, seemingly loitering, which was rather amusing. But everyone avoided them, and when my granddaughter came out, my son immediately took her hand, took her over to the policeman and woman who were present, introduced himself and our granddaughter Evie, and next minute they had a crowd around them, and the kids just thought it was wonderful. And I just thought I'd share that good story, because nice stuff is happening out there.
Christ, I feel incredibly negative now. That wasn't the intention at all. I don't want to put a dark cloud over it. You know, some schools get it very, very right. Yeah. There are some gaps. I think that's the important thing to mention, is that there are still some stories of, if some drugs are found in a school, potentially saying, right, we don't want to go to talk about this too much because then we'll have a drugs problem, we don't want the bad reputation. So, I mean, that is the case in some areas. Some schools are fantastic and some academies are very, very good as well, but it's just not across the board. And I think what we need to do is highlight the ones who really are focused on what they do inside and oblivious to everything else that happens outside. And there are still some out there who say, when you leave this building, that's the community's fault, that's the council's responsibility, the public's responsibility, we're here to teach you your ABCs.
Yeah, and I think it's back, isn't it, to a police presence. So if people are used to seeing them on the streets, they do then have a chat with them and just come across them in the shopping or wherever they happen to be. So it's a two-way thing. Lovely. Thank you very much. An interesting project, and look forward to hearing more about that. Community Drugs Partnership now. Alan.
Good morning. I'll be brief. Before you is a report to inform the Health and Wellbeing Board of the new Combating Drugs Partnership, its purpose and its aims, and we're here to seek approval, or I'm here to seek approval for this Combating Drugs Partnership to become a subgroup of the Health and Wellbeing Board and report into it. Just to summarise, the government launched a new drugs strategy in December 21. There's a link within the report and some more detail on that, but there's new funding attached to this national drug strategy, but part of the string attached to the new funding is that we establish a Combating Drugs Partnership in each local area, and it's to determine the local area. You're able to, whether it's a upper tier authority or a partnership of authorities, but locally we've gone for a Portsmouth Combating Drugs Partnership. So the guidance sets out activity that we need to do as part of the Combating Drugs Partnership. We have to have a senior responsible owner, and in Portsmouth that's our Director of Public Health. We aim to bring senior leaders and organisations together to oversee the implementation and meet the objectives of the new National Drug Strategy, and to make sure that we use the new money that's supposed to be coming down to meet those objectives and to work in a collaborative way. It's a multi-agency partnership, and the membership is detailed in Appendix A within the report. So key responsibilities of the partnership, certainly in the short term, we have to produce a detailed needs assessment by the end of this month, followed by a partnership plan by the end of December. So it's been fairly tight timescales because the partnership was only established in September. And then we will be overseeing and coordinating the funding streams which will be coming down as part of the national strategy, and the funding is detailed in Appendix B. And as from where we are today, it will mean over £1 million of extra funding by 24-25, assuming it does all come down as anticipated. The part of the partnership will be to regularly review progress against objectives linked to the national strategy. We will need to develop a local partnership framework, and that framework will monitor how we're delivering and working against the objectives. So our aim is that we will report annually to the Health and Wellbeing Board on the progress of the plan, of the performance framework and our sort of more strategic objectives. These will be linked to the National Outcome Framework, which is in Appendix C. So we're proposing that we bring to your February meeting, that we bring our needs assessment and the partnership plan just for sort of final sign-off and approval from the Health and Wellbeing Board. But just to say that the Combating Drugs Partnership will also be linked to a range of other organisations and other bodies, including the Police and Crime Commission is establishing a Pan-Hampshire Drugs Forum where the 4 Combating Drugs Partnerships will feed into and coordinate activity. So just finally, the recommendations then are that you approve the Combating Drugs Partnership becoming a subgroup, that you will approve receipt of an annual plan and progress from the Combating Drugs Partnership, and that you agree to review the needs assessment and the drug and alcohol delivery plan at your meeting in February.
Thank you. People's thoughts? Matt?
Thanks, and thanks, Alan, for the presentation on that and all the work that's gone into setting this up. It was done on extraordinarily short notice. I think it was 3.5 weeks between us getting the announcement from the government that these had to be set up to the entire understanding, as Alan said, about what the footprint was going to be, who the responsible officer was going to be, what the membership was going to be, all had to be done in extraordinarily short period of time, which I know was everywhere in the country had exactly the same situation, but really was not very sensible or conducive. But under that, obviously we've had one meeting already. We've got our next meeting next week. And I'd like to thank everyone involved. This is a statutory body. I'm not sure if it's a necessary statutory body, but it is again one that we have to have. And especially as there are already things that are in place on a Hampshire and Isle of Wight level, and also some other things that we have, those good relationships with the police locally and with other services. But we have this now. We are doing everything that's required of us, and we are making sure that we're making it as broad as possible to make sure that we are involving the right people for what is, as I say, now a statutory body and reporting. I certainly think the right place for it to be is a sub-board of the Health and Wellbeing Board, reporting into ourselves, as I know our colleagues in Hampshire, the Isle of Wight and Southampton are doing as well, and making sure that it's got that, it's a statutory body under a statutory body, which I think makes absolute sense, and so it's reporting into us, and as Alan said, it's also, and I'm sure Terry will be coming in a minute, but coming in with the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Forum, which I think again is a sensible way forwards to make sure that we're coordinating, because as we know, so much of it does go across the lines, but also, and it fits in with what we were talking about earlier with the stuff around community safety, about we know there are particular issues in the city, and it's right to have it at this level where we do have to have this body, so we have those concentrations. So thanks so much everyone for this and for the report today.
Thank you. I agree. I think this is the right place. It's everyone's business, and this definitely impacts all of our organisations, so would be the best place to come. And I'm pleased you're looking at the whole Hampshire piece as well, because obviously we don't want to do things in isolation if we can do it more effectively once there, but obviously we will have our own more bespoke issues here that we need to address. So very welcome, the paper, and we look forward to February for that. Terry, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to shadow those words really, and I think the 10-year drugs plan is good. It's unfortunate that it's been quite knee-jerk in terms of the time that you've had to set that up, but nonetheless I think there are some really good, it's a right place for it to be really. I think it's one of the biggest generational problems we face is this social acceptance around drug taking, that and the effect of the internet probably on young people's mental health, and it's always the lowest in society who are the highest punished, shall we say, and there's a big problem with the middle classes as well, and their acceptance of drug taking, not understanding what the process that we go through to get their drugs to them. So there is some work to be done there. I would ask those involved to look at advertising. You know, I think looking back when I was growing up, nobody wore seatbelts in their cars. You know, now, because of a huge national campaign, the Click Click campaign or whatever it was, everybody wears a seatbelt. You know, smoking on aeroplanes. You all know better than I do around how socially accepted smoking was, and nowadays it not so much. So there is some work to be done. I think if we can do some work on campaigns, education of course is key to that. And you know, I remember the posters in PSHRE rooms in schools, and they were very off-putting. That sort of stuff I think is really key. Let's let the government seize assets. Let the government go after the crime gangs and take away and cut the head off the snake there. But on a local level, you know, there's lots that we can do, and I really welcome what we've heard today and the report really. And please do get involved in the Pan Hampshire Drugs Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh yeah.
Well, just a quick thing to welcome what's going on. I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with a group of traders who were concerned about persistent shoplifting, and for the first time the offer of residential detox is back on the agenda for people, and that was incredibly welcome from people. I know it means working with a very small group of people because you have to work with the willing and it's intensive, but to get back to the point that for people who do choose that they want to come off, there is something now available, is really welcome.
Thank you. So we're all happy to accept the recommendations? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Moving on to Health and Care Portsmouth now with Jo.
Thank you. Yes, and you have a draft of the updated Health and Care Portsmouth blueprint in front of you today, which hopefully is fairly familiar to you all. The blueprint's been around since 2015, and members of this board and other partners across the city have been involved in refreshing it, and it sets out our commitment to work together to deliver more joined up health and care services. And we've been refreshing the blueprint in light of the move from the CCG to the ICB, the Integrated Care Board, and the development of the Integrated Care Partnership, to ensure that the blueprint now sets out not just our commitments to work together, but also how we can look at improving and reducing health inequalities in the city through that partnership approach, and sort of explains our 5 pillars that we've been talking around our priority areas for children, people with frailty, long-term conditions, mental health, vulnerable adults, how we manage the market together as well, and create that more person-centred, coordinated care package. And I'm aware of and health improvement and wellbeing. Apologies, the main one to miss out. I was desperately racking my brain there, which one I was missing. So I do apologise. And it sets out how we'll come together, how we're using our pooled funds and delegated funding arrangements to support us in that, and what our priorities will be. And the reason this is a draft is when we took it to the Health and Care Partnership, the group that sort of oversees this, really we thought as a done deal, actually we thought there are some other areas we want to explore a bit further and really put into this document, as well as sort of some overarching themes that will sit alongside those priorities. And those are workforce. How can we really come together and think about our workforce challenges that we have across the health and care sector, but also how do we do that in a way that really supports local people in employment and looks at some of our young people who are perhaps struggling to get into careers in health and care. So we've set up a small working group to kind of look at that and think about what solutions can we do locally, how can we work more effectively with local schools, colleges and the university to think not just about the strategic developments like the development of the medical school that the university came to talk to us about last time in the Health and Wellbeing Board, but also some of those more local things that we can do that might make a big difference as well. That's one area. And the other area is around what other areas are calling a community empowered NHS, and really about how do we harness and optimise the use of and support that the huge voluntary and community sector that we have in the city can really do to support us in managing health inequalities, but also in helping people access healthcare and access exercise. So it's things we've tried before, looking at Diane and some of our social prescribing work. But really, is there a way we can accelerate and really maximise that now so that it becomes much more mainstream than perhaps the pockets of good practice as well? So I think they're the two challenges that we've set ourselves in the Health and Care Partnership, and we want to do a bit more in this document to just explore that and expand those thoughts. So that's why it's a draft today and not the finished version, but you will see that very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? David?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I really welcome this. I think it's important that, and I know a lot of work goes into it, but I think it's really important that we keep the blueprint up to date and fresh. I think we're in a different health and care landscape, and it gives us a real opportunity to help influence that, and we'll come on to that a bit more, I think, on item 10. But it's really important that from the Health and Wellbeing Board, we're able to articulate what we're doing, why we're doing it, who's involved in that, how it operates. And I think, it's important that we recognise that what we're doing is being looked at. And we're in a transitional phase at the moment, and the importance of the voice of place and the importance of local innovation, creativity, integration is going to be really important in its influence on those other tiers and elements of the new system. So I really welcome this. Don't be surprised if we bring it back to you fairly regularly, because it's important that we're able to share it with others and engage with others around it. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm particularly noisy today. I just wanted to say, Joe, thank you very much for reminiscing about reablement, and I'm thrilled to be able to say to you, in the form of our Close Encounters programme, which we have now just received funding for the next 4 years from the National Lottery, it is alive and well. We offer guided conversations, we're having that what is a good day for you, bringing people back into their communities. It's very one-to-one driven work. So as Councillor Vernon Jackson was saying earlier, it's the intensive stuff at ground level that builds the swell, and it certainly is doing that. So we're really happy to share that work with as many people as I possibly can, and I'm delighted this is ongoing, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I was on a meeting yesterday with other cabinet members for adult social care and public health around the South East region, and every time I speak to colleagues about this, I was at the National Adults and Children's Services Conference 3 weeks ago with Andy Biddle, and it is striking how much our integration is seen as different, how a lot of the issues that go on in other authorities and in other places we either don't see or have a very different perspective on because of our integration. So this blueprint, I think, is great for us to have that as an ongoing position to say how the change from the CCG to the ICB Portsmouth Place has changed things, but actually the most important thing is the continuity. Because when you're looking at other situations and other places, they want to learn from us, and they want to know how we got to this position, because and we know this has been going for a very, very long time, this integration and this work. But this is certainly when we talk about blueprints, often we're talking about this is a blueprint to use elsewhere. This is absolutely a blueprint to use elsewhere. And I think we're just very fortunate to have the team we have in the city. As Diane was saying, it goes out to the voluntary and community sector as well. And it really helps, working for the voluntary community sector myself, it really helps having that single place you can go, rather than thinking it's all fragmented and you're all going separately. So I don't think we can underestimate how important that is. As David has said, we're going to hear in the next one about how that fits in with the integrated care partnership at the Hampshire and Isle of Wight level, which again is a really important thing in working with our partners. So thank you so much everyone who's involved in this, and of course the Health and Wellbeing Board is at the heart of this as well, because that brings in that wider spectrum of organisations together, which goes outside the direct scope of Health and Care Portsmouth, but we are indeed all involved in Health and Care Portsmouth.
Thank you. So we'll look forward to the future iterations of the paper.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And we'll definitely bring it back and pick up some of that work of the VCS and how can we share and develop and sell more of those good news stories, because they are out there. We just need to do even more, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we were going to do integrated care partnership strategy next, but Joe has to leave by 11:30, so if it's okay, we're going to just do the report on dentistry, and then we'll come back to the integrated care partnership strategy. So Joe, do you want to do the dentistry? I believe it's you and Helen, though, isn't it? It's a joint act.
Sorry, apologies for messing up the agenda. So yes, and dentistry, as we know, has been a real challenge in the city. And there has been a number of workshops and conversations around that, some led by some of our MPs and involving universities, all of which have been really helpful. The ICBs took on responsibility for commissioning NHS dentistry, pharmacy and optometry from July 2022, when the ICBs came into being. So relatively new responsibility for us. Prior to that, responsibility for those commissioning those services sat with NHS England at a regional level. So the move to ICBs is really positive, because I think it gives us a much better feel and opportunity to look at things with a more local perspective, because the regional team's a very small regional team, and it's quite a specialist commissioning and contracting area. And I think it's fair to say that trying to do that at a regional level, the most important thing has been ensuring that consistency, which is really important, but within that creates some tensions for what happens in local places. And with a small team, with the best will in the world, they have been unable to develop relationships with providers that can help you move away from perhaps a contractual transactional approach and develop more relationships and understand the local context. So that's the aim behind the move from NHS England to moving it to ICBs. Very early days for all of us. We're still working very closely with the NHS England team, and as they are the experts in quite a specialist area, they are continuing to do the work on behalf of the ICBs. And we're looking at our governance and delegation around that to ensure that we can get that local flavour into something that's been traditionally much more I'm trying not to say one size fits all, but to try and have that real consistent approach across the region, which has been really so important. We can build on that and develop more local options now, I think. So early days in that and how we do that, that doesn't sort of take away from the huge challenges that we have across the Isle of Wight, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, around recruiting NHS dentists and providing equitable access across the area. And Portsmouth is one of the hardest hit areas in that space, really, because of levels of deprivation, and the work that NHS England and Public Health England did before the merger has identified that. So Hampshire and Isle of Wight is a priority within the South East region for improving access, and Portsmouth is one of the priority areas within that, alongside the Isle of Wight, Havant and Gosport. And you'll note from that they're all areas where levels of deprivation are an issue. So really important that we work together to look at improving that. We've got a number of procurements coming online that will due to hit from April. We have 2 in Portsmouth, so that's really positive, and again we're working much more closely to ensure that the mobilisation of that is more successful than perhaps some previous procurements have been in the last year or so. We're also doing some real work really closely with Helen around oral health strategy and working with the university to see what more they could do to support us. So there is a lot of work going on. The challenges in NHS dentistry are sort of local, national, regional and national. In part, the NHS dentist contract from 2006 is recognised to have caused some perverse incentives in the system, in all honesty, around how people can access and get on to take on additional NHS dentistry activity. And the pricing around that, again, has some disincentives with it. So that contract is being renewed nationally and reviewed, and they're partway through that now. As I said, we've talked about increasing procurement, but the biggest challenge, again, around for us locally in Hampshire and Isle of Wight is that recruitment of dentists. We don't have a dental school locally, and we know that people are more likely to stay where they've trained, so that's really challenging. We were perhaps quite reliant on EU dentists prior to EU exit, so that has been challenging for us as well, and we're working again to look at how we can do that international recruitment and how can we work with Health Education England to make that as easy as possible, but also how do we increase the training places. So a lot of that is national, but again, trying to work with our local providers and build the relationships and understand their challenges so that we can work with them to resolve them is really important. So Helen might want to add more about the oral health strategy work.
Thank you, Jo. So the local authority actually have responsibility to work with their NHS colleagues, particularly around leading on oral health promotion. And we had a dental summit in Portsmouth in June of this year that was hosted by the University of Portsmouth and chaired by Penny Mordaunt MP. So there, as well as talking about the complexities of the contract, there were 2 recommendations that came out from that summit. One we're currently working with Professor Chris Luca from the Dental Academy on, which is working also with Health Education England and the Dental Deanery. And that is around bidding. So we've got a steering group that will be developing a bid for a centre for dental development, which is not obviously a dental school, which is what the University Dental Academy would like, but it is an opportunity to bring more dental students into Portsmouth. So that's we're at the beginning of that piece of work, but it's a joint piece of work, and Joe and myself are on the steering group for that, but also, obviously, we are working closely with NHS England on that as well. Then the second steering group, which has been set up, which I'm chairing, is an all health promotion meeting. So we have, working very closely with the Dental Academy and Professor Chris Luca and Solent Dental Services as well as our PCC, it's Health and Care Portsmouth, and that includes our Health and Care Portsmouth communications team. So we are basically developing a bid to get transformation funding to extend what's already in place in terms of oral health promotion in the city, because obviously oral health promotion is at the core, it's the preventative bit, or preventing the need for acute services or any dental emergency services. So we are already working closely with the Dental Academy, who already deliver oral health promotion using their students within some schools in Portsmouth, our more deprived schools, some care homes, and particularly importantly, our homeless population, who have obviously very poor oral health and oral health outcomes. So what we're bidding for is to be able to extend that to cover the whole city, so all schools, all care homes, and obviously continue to do the work with our homeless population. So that's where we currently are. And also you might be aware, because you could argue a bit like the seatbelts conversation we had earlier, and I know this is not everybody feels the same about this, but at the moment, probably the most, a bit like immunisation, effective way of having good oral health is actually water fluoridation. Now, at the moment, that it sits or has sat with local government to make those decisions locally, but we're in the final stages of a health and social care bill, which will basically, it's going through Parliament now, which will give back that decision making to the, basically the Chief Medical Officer and the Secretary of State for Health. So I know it's very controversial and people feel very strongly, particularly in this area. I know there's been many, many, many years, but it probably is the most effective way of reducing childhood teeth decay or dental decay. So that's also in turn, and that's where we currently are. But all of this working together is hoping for the improvements in contracting UDAs locally for NHS dentistry as well as the oral health work. And I think this is a good example of the Health and Care Portsmouth and the blueprint of us working together to actually get to a shared outcome.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Helen. So hopefully the report gives you some more information alongside what we're trying to do. I think we have to be realistic in our expectations around dentistry. There are some real challenges at every level, but we are working to look at how best we can resolve those issues with the new responsibilities that have come into the ICB. So thank you.
Thank you. Comments or questions? David?
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is a really interesting example of how the choice of priorities, whether that's by the Integrated Care Partnership or the Integrated Care Board or nationally, will impact on the delivery of services. And it doesn't quite come out strongly in the report, but there are in this report glimmers of how the current procurement approach directly impacts on the equity of service delivery. And, I think this is going to be a really interesting bit of turf, both for the Integrated Care Partnership in terms of how it chooses its priorities and how it interplays with the Integrated Care Board, and for the Integrated Care Board in terms of how it interfaces with regional and national policy. Because my understanding is that the way in which the units are allocated and the way in which the providers are rewarded for those units does adversely impact on those areas of deprivation, just because of the complexity of the work. And this, as Joe says, this is going to be difficult territory to get into. But if any of the rhetoric around inequalities local choice and influence is going to mean anything, these are exactly the sorts of areas that we need to get into. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David, and you're right, and I think that is a recognised downfall or downside of the current contract, because it's very much, it's the dentists get paid per UDA, per unit of dental activity, and there are sort of set descriptions as to what that includes. The challenge is, the harder it is to access dentistry and the less dentally fit a person's mouth is, the longer it takes the dentist to provide the care, so that they're adversely being impacted on that, because they're having to do more work potentially, and it's taking longer, so they can't see as many patients. So there is that disincentive that people recognise. I think one of the challenges is, how do you put in then a local commissioned service, potentially, like we're able to do quite easily with our primary medical contracts and services, that recognises those differences, and that's been slightly more complex in dentistry, and some areas have managed to do that a bit more flexibly and a bit more creatively than others, but it's absolutely, I think, where we will need to look and to work. But as Helen said, we need to get the oral health strategy right as well, so that we are creating more dentally fit mouths, particularly in our children and young people, and I think we need to prioritise that as much as anything.
Thank you. Helen, want to come back?
Sorry, not to labour the point, but I do think that David makes a really important point. The reality is, you could argue that our population in Portsmouth are almost doubly impacted, because we have, and it's very clear in the report, we have poor oral health because we have deprived communities, and the reality is, if you look at all behaviours within deprivation, it correlates completely. You know, it's poor diet, higher sugars cause oral decay. We've got higher levels in our population, and it's also, and I suppose this is just the important point in terms of the NHS commissioning, it's not necessarily intentional, but unfortunately health inequalities are then greater because accessing those NHS services are more difficult. So the majority of people in the country who can afford to pay privately for a dentist will, and those that can't, unfortunately, will be almost doubly affected. And I suppose it's a good lesson for us in terms of thinking about access and health inequalities. It's not just about access, although that's really important. It's also understanding those communities and why, those behaviours are worse, and of course we need that oral health strategy, but it's also the hardest communities to reach to make those changes. So I think it's just important lessons for us when we think about commissioning any service. It's almost the double inequality of not being able to access as well as also those poorer behaviours. And that's not to stigmatise, which I think I can see we've got our Portsmouth pensioners in the audience. I recently presented some similar work, and it does look like we're stigmatising when we call these things out. We're not stigmatising, we're just raising those issues because we do need to deal with them, and we have to think about how we deal with them. So I won't labour the point anymore.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Helen, and I think it's really visible and obvious in NHS dentistry, and coming new into that, because I'm leading the development of POD, pharmacy, optometry and dentistry across the Isle of Wight as well. So and I did that, sort of put myself forward for that, because I knew it was such an issue for us locally. It's very visible with the levels of deprivation and access, and how that can disadvantage people is probably not as visible and obvious in some other areas of our commissioning. So we really do need to be aware of it. And we've seen it again, haven't we, with the COVID vaccinations as well. Some of the most deprived in our community really struggled and didn't come forward. And to really get that 20% of people who would have benefited from the COVID vaccine, we had to work differently, harder, just engage with those communities in a different way. And I think they're really valuable lessons for us that we need to learn, because there'll be other examples that won't be as visible as those, and we're as you say, probably disadvantaging people because we're making access harder by just having a sort of a standard offer.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? No, thank you very much, Joe and Helen. Brilliant. So now we'll go back to Ros, who's coming to present the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy. Welcome, Ros.
Thank you. I'm going to take it that you've read the slides, but I'm just going to pick out a few things and then take some questions, if that's okay. Thank you very much. So just as a by way of quick introduction, part of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight integrated care system is to establish an integrated care partnership. And that's where partners across the whole system come together and are mandated to work together to improve the health and well-being of our whole population. The immediate task the Integrated Care Partnership has to do is develop an interim integrated care strategy by this December. So that's happening across the whole country. We all have to submit an interim integrated care strategy by the end of December. So I'm just going to quickly take you through what we've been doing and some of the themes and priorities that are coming up out of that strategy before we submit it. So over the last few months, we've been working with all our partners across the system, or as many partners as we possibly can, and our stakeholders to develop the strategy. But really building on what we've already done over the last few months and years, whether that's through our joint strategic needs assessments, all the work of our health and wellbeing boards, some of the insights and data that people have shared with us, and some quite large engagement events that we've had as well over the last few weeks and months, which is great to say. I can recognise some of these people here who've actually been involved in that. So when we've collectively developed the strategy, we had a number of principles which we co-developed and co-produced together about what was important in coming up with what we were going to focus on. And some of those things were around, let's support what's already happening in the local places. So taking into consideration things that you've already spoken about today, the blueprint, the Health and Wellbeing Board priorities, what's already happening out there. We also said one of the principles was let's instead of having hundreds of priorities, as we often do in lots of organisations, is let's focus on a few. Let's really try and get a few that will make a difference. Another principle is around let's not duplicate what's there, but how do we have that added benefit of doing things together at a wider scale? So all the things that you've been discussing today for Portsmouth are really important. How does the interim integrated care strategy support some of that? How is it evidence-based, and what's really in our gift to change? So if it's not in our gift to change, let's not do it. So some of the themes that are coming up, which are in your pack, it's on page 66. We've tried to put the strategy on one page, which has been a challenge in itself. But on page 66, we've got what the priorities are that are emerging for our interim strategy. And there are 5 main priorities or themes. One around children and young people. One about how do we improve mental well-being. Thirdly, how do we support people to build the health, happiness, wealth and well-being? Fourthly, what do we need to do to support that? And we've said something around our workforce. We know our workforce. We've just spoken about it in several of the items today. Workforce, we absolutely know we've got to have a strong, motivated workforce in order to deliver what we want to do. And how do we improve our digital data, insights, digital inclusion in everything we do. So those are the 5 themes that are coming out and are emerging. And those are the themes that will be the format of our strategy, our interim, and I keep stressing it is interim strategy. We can change it, we can flex it as we go through, but let's go with a few themes for a start. So the next steps for us are now testing back with yourselves and our wider partners and get an agreement to the direction of travel, even if we haven't completely nailed everything. We've got a number of meetings over the next week or so to really, really firm this up and agree a longer document, which will be finalised today in terms of that draft, so we can share that. And then, of course, in a way, the real work will start after Christmas in the new year about how do we really start delivering, and what are we going to do together on these 5 themes that will really, really make a difference and support the work that you and other areas are already doing on place. So I guess just to summarise from my perspective, this is an opportunity to look at things differently across the whole population, supporting health and well-being, improving outcomes, reducing inequalities, all those things you've spoken about. It's an opportunity to focus on those few big things that will make a difference rather than having hundreds of priorities. It's an opportunity to do things together that will also support place, so together across our care and our health partners. I think we've got to be really cognizant that as well as the long-term priorities, we know we have got short-term pressures. We have all got those in our organisations and in our lives. And I guess finally, it's just an opportunity to say thank you for everybody who's engaged in this so far, and I hope this is the absolute start of of our journey in order to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros. Any comments or questions? David.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think I'd just like to thank Ros and her colleagues for the effort that's gone into this. I think, as I touched on earlier, it's an interesting transitional time at the moment, and I think it's quite interesting when you look at those 5 priorities. They're all incredibly laudable priorities. I think what's interesting is when you look at the emergence of those priorities and you look at those groups and those individuals that have had the greatest opportunity to influence those priorities, what we're seeing are the priorities, in part, that people don't feel are getting sufficient voice through other bits of the system. And I think that's quite an important thing for us not to lose sight of, because if we're not careful, we'll end up with the ICP voicing those bits that tend to get missed. They're in the white papers every time, but they're not necessarily at the forefront of the delivery, nor the spend. And then we'll have other bits of the system that are getting on with business as usual, spending all the money on the acute services or whatever it might be, and we'll end up with the 2 bits of the system that should be coming together maybe beginning to drift apart. And I think that's why it's valuable that we treat this as a transitionary stage. You can't disagree with any of those priorities, they're great. But the most important bit is the wiring between the parts of the new system. How is it that the ICP influences the ICB in terms of how it spends, 3.3 billion? We're not spending a lot of 3.3 billion on those priorities. So how is that influence going to develop over time? And how is the ICB going to influence up the chain? Because the ICB will be driven by the constitutional priorities, none of which, I believe, may be the digital, but none of which are in those 5. So, I think that's one for us to continue to engage in. And it's really important that the health and wellbeing boards and the places get their voice heard in this debate. And it's equally important that the ICB is alive to that as well and is engaging in it. And amongst that will be these issues about equality. We talk a lot about inequality, but we don't really know what we mean when we say it. It sounds right. but I think we need to get into the detail of that so it actually begins to influence how we allocate our resources. And that is going to be a real challenge because there's not going to be a lot more resource around. So this is going to be taking away from some areas and redirecting to others. And that is going to be a struggle, but we've just got to make sure that we get our local voice, both for Portsmouth, but also the voice of place in an integrated way into that debate. And just the other thing is, there's a statutory obligation, not just for the ICB to have regard to the partnership strategy, but also the local authorities. And I think that's really important. I think we just need to continue to emphasise that. It's the ICP's strategy, not the ICB's.
Yeah, thank you. Matt?
Thank you. And I think David's just brought up something that's really, where is he? Really critical, which is about the fact that the integrated care boards are effectively on a statutory basis going to be pulled in two completely different directions, because they're depending on the strategy, which, as he said, comes from this partnership. And I think the partnership, as you've seen within the papers, is very broad. So I think at the meeting, I think Rod, at 100 people, over 100 people were at the meeting which took place last month, I think it was, which was all about, is where this is jumping off with the strategy going forwards. So they have a statutory responsibility to adhere to the strategy that comes from the partnership, but then of course they also have the stuff that comes from Whitehall and comes from so the priorities of the government, but also the priorities of the NHS as NHS England as a corporate body. And again, this is something that came up quite a bit at the National Adults and Children's Services Conference, is that we actually had the Chief Executive of the NHS talking a lot about what her priorities were, which doesn't really help when they don't appear to have anything to do with the strategy that is going to come out from all of these integrated care partnerships, which is very much on that prevention side and on that wider population health. Thus, actually, it makes all this all the more important in terms of those priorities. And as David said, it also then feeds in to our priorities as a council, because as a local authority and as a local health and care system, because of course a lot of that, and this is the thing about integration, is the funding comes from a lot of that funding comes via the ICB. So the engagement has been really good. As I say, over 100 people at this meeting last month, which was really positive, making use of lots of partners, including the voluntary and community sector, and again, it has this real opportunity to inform the board, of which we have 2 members on it here, with David and Sarah. Sorry, Sarah, had a complete mind blank there, but also with our other local authority members on there, which are from Hampshire and Southampton. So this really is important stuff, and how it fits in with our health and wellbeing strategy and how it fits in with our priorities as Health and Care Portsmouth cannot be underestimated. So working together with our integration is a really important way forwards, because we can have so much influence and input on this because of our positive things that we're trying to do, which can then also work on to say what's positive and what can work together well for the integrated care partnership, the integrated care board, and therefore that wider integrated care system. So I've got a meeting with Ros later today. We've got our meeting next week of the partnership to come up with this interim strategy for December. But be in no minds, this is interim, this is ongoing, this is something we're going to be having input in from Portsmouth, working with our partners across Hampshire Isle of Wight, and I think the onus is also, certainly for myself, is when talking about this with my fellow Health and Wellbeing Boards chairs across the piece and cabinet members for health, wellbeing and social care across the piece as well as our partners at the districts and boroughs in Hampshire, is really important for us to work together, because all of this is about wider determinants, all of this is about the broadest nature of our population health and well-being, and I think the onus is on that. It really brings home again that this is about everything in our communities. It's not just about what goes on at your GPs, at your hospitals, and in the social care system. It's much, much broader than that. So thanks for all the work that's going on. Looking forward to the work that's going to be going forwards, and I, particularly from the Portsmouth point of view, look forward to us as a Health and Wellbeing Board continuing to have a lot of input, getting the reports back and giving our feedback, and also through our members who are on this board, who are on the Integrated Care Board, in terms of putting those things we come up with and the priorities that we have here and across Hampshire and Isle of Wight, go into that as well.
Thank you. Gerald?
Very quickly, I want to disagree with David. I'm sorry, I'm not interested in equality on everything, and I think we have in this area a significantly better service of integration between health and social care. All the reports I get from the hospital is that we get people out of QA quicker and better and faster in Portsmouth than from Hampshire, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want the ICB to drag us down to the lowest common denominator that is Hampshire. I don't want them to drag us down to a worse service. So I'm not interested in equality. I want us to keep having a really good service for Portsmouth residents, and I think we should be fighting hard for that. If we can drag the county up to Portsmouth levels, normally kicking and screaming, great. But I'm sorry, David, I'm hoping that you and Sarah and everybody else at the ICB board is going to be fighting our corner for our residents to make sure that they keep the better service that they get from being in Portsmouth, from being in Hampshire, and we shouldn't tolerate being dragged down to the levels of equality of poor service that happens in Hampshire.
Well, yeah, that's why we need to understand what we mean by inequalities, and when we talk about that, are we talking about outcomes, are we talking about inputs, what are we talking about? That's why we've got to be really clear about these things.
Personally, is that, David, if you're somebody in a hospital, it's outcomes you're interested in, it's not inputs.
Thank you. So, thank you, Ros, for coming. I would encourage, there's emails on the bottom of your presentation, isn't there? I would encourage anyone who's got views to email and put your views across, because that's the paper's going to be written, isn't the strategy's got to be developed, and that's your way of getting input if you're not going to any of the other events that are held. Thank you. Social value report. Natasha's going to speak to that, I believe.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. The purpose of bringing this paper today is to begin a discussion about how a citywide social value approach can support the Health and Wellbeing Board to deliver the joint health and wellbeing strategy. So just a bit of background. The City Council introduced a social value policy in March 2021. The three key areas of impact the policy focuses on are social, so improving physical and mental well-being, reducing poverty and social isolation, addressing inequalities, there's that word again, Economic, so opportunities for local SMEs, greater inclusion of the voluntary and social enterprise sectors in our supply chains, upskilling future workforce, and sustainability. So, for example, improving air quality, working towards our carbon net zero goal. So those are the key areas of impact that the policy focuses on. The approach that we've adopted over the last 18 months since adopting the policy are focusing on impact rather than output, making sure that our suppliers understand the social value principle so that they're just demystified, and making sure that there is appropriate guidance for them. Making sure the approach is proportionate and relevant and targeted to our local need. It emphasises partnership and incentivises compliance with social value commitments through reward and recognition rather than through any punitive measures. So over the last 18 months, we've developed a toolkit, and we've implemented that and applied it to about 18 large contracts across the City Council's procurement. And we've secured social value commitments against all of those based on local need, which details of that are set out in the report. But when applying a financial proxy, these have a value of about £20 million in the city. So we're now looking to broaden the approach to social value, particularly in line with the objectives of the health and wellbeing strategy. We note that it explicitly acknowledges the role of social value in addressing some of the wider systemic challenges in the city. And we also recognise that social value in the city can be even more effective if it represents a way of work that all city partners can sign up to and embrace, obviously as much as organisational policies and procedures allow. So we'd welcome a discussion on the opportunities that a wider social value approach could bring, particularly building on the experience and good practice that the board partners are able to bring to the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Comments? Helen?
I think this is fantastic, Natasha, work, and it feels it's very much aligned in with the health and wellbeing strategy, both in terms of what we've said we're going to deliver as a partnership, but it also, for me, underpins the ethos of how we've agreed that we'll work together. So I think it would be really great to bring it back to a development session, which I noted in your paper, for further discussion when we all get together, to actually look at how we're delivering the health and wellbeing strategies, how we are all taking responsibility for each of those priorities within our, we are the biggest organisations, employers, and employing local people in the city. So how we decide how we're going to do our business together has such an impact on everything we've talked about today in terms of the health and wellbeing outcomes of our residents, everything that's in the ICP strategy. So it's a real opportunity to get together and actually look at how we can perhaps share. And we had a really good session at our last development session around how we are all going to take responsibility for our poverty priority and how we can all, as anchor institutions, have an impact on that. And I think this would be the next. And I'm aware it's work that's already underway in other parts of the partnership. We had the brilliant summit last Friday morning, the climate change summit, which fits very nicely into this, and actually everything that we need to deliver for that and for social value is completely aligned. So I think it would be a really good opportunity for us as partners to get together and work out how we're going to roll this out, because I'm aware, actually, also looking at Mark, who's right in front of you, that it was one of the things that Mark presented at the climate change in terms of the work they're doing at the hospital. So I think it's a really good piece of work. Oh, Matt.
This came up at Cabinet yesterday, so I'm just going to say very quickly, just on this forum as well, this has been 4 years in the making. It's been a huge amount of work that's gone on to do this. I know that colleagues at the council are rightly proud of what we're doing, really moving to a Portsmouth model of social value, and we want that to be something that people, a bit like we were talking about before with our integration, where people can see and learn from it across the boards, and more broadly. And I've said particularly something that I think that since the procurement rules have changed for contracting and commissioning by the government a couple of years ago, this gives us much more scope as well to, as has been shown in the report, about being able to base contracting decisions on social value considerations rather than just on value for money, which under the old procurement rules was all we were able to base things on. So it just gives you, it's just an idea of, apart from anything else, with all the other things, it really gives you the opportunity to make some really sensible decisions based on actually what's best for the community, rather than just what can you do for the cheapest price, which, as we know from under the previous rules, really did, and these government bodies in general, to some really poor outcomes. So on that side, I'm particularly pleased that's coming through. But also, let's be able, hopefully, be able to be talking about this Portsmouth model and it being adopted and saying this is something we want to take forward nationwide.
Thank you. Susie?
Thank you. Apologies for lateness, but I'm glad I got here in time for this item. And thank you, Natasha, for outlining it. I just want to add a couple of things, probably building on what other people have said, what Helen and Matt have said. I think what we need to do is move it from a policy into practice, and that's quite difficult for something that seems a little bit abstract. Anything to do with values tends to take people into this kind of abstract kind of world. The way I see it is there is a massive need in the city, and there's also a massive will to give. And this is both by residents, but also by local organisations, whether they're big or small. And I think what this can do is bring those things together if it's done well. I think examples help, because, again, going back to the abstract nature of it, there's a procurement side, but then there's all the other things that can be done, which would make such a difference to people who you know, in the city who could either need it or other organisations who could benefit from it. And I think what happens is sometimes the pressure on everyone to keep surviving sometimes allows that space for creative thinking or different thinking to kind of be pushed out. And I think having a policy which would be built on with loads of live examples will help people engage with it more. And then I think it will snowball, because it's once it's understood and embedded, it's a positive thing for everyone.
Thank you. Yep, Gerald.
Just very quickly, if anybody else wants to steal it for their organisation, they're very welcome.
Thank you.
As long as they call it the Portsmouth model.
That's right.
So, Kelly, the suggestion was that we would have a development session on this. Are we happy to schedule one in? I think that would be quite useful, again, with some live examples and how it works. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And thank you, Natasha. Dominique, for the last two items, we're over to you. So we're doing air quality, I believe. Is that right?
Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Mark to deliver the next item on air quality. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Thank you. And thank you to Helen, actually, for mentioning last week's Portsmouth Green Partnership Charter that was signed in this very building last Friday, which I think was a big moment for the city, actually, in terms of bringing together Portsmouth City Council, the University of Portsmouth, the International Port, the Naval Base, Hive Portsmouth Hospitals, NHS Trust, in terms of making a number of commitments around this bigger agenda. So no, thank you. It's good to recognise that. So the purpose of this paper, which Dominique's actually authored, so thank you, Dominique. I'll present it, but I know to thank you for the time you've taken for this. The purpose of this one is to update the board on the air quality and active travel priority of the health and wellbeing strategy, and I'm going to make some recommendations at the end. There are 4 or 5 things we're looking to seek the board's approval on, the board members' approval on behalf of their organisations on today, if that's okay. But first of all, just a brief reminder that air pollution is the largest environmental risk to public health in the United Kingdom. And we know that air quality affects everyone, but again, back to inequalities, we know that there's inequalities in exposure in terms of the greatest impact against in terms of air quality affects the most vulnerable, affects children, affects the elderly, affects those suffering with long-term health conditions, and it particularly affects, obvious thing to say, those living close to main roads and trunkways. Our Charles Dickens ward is significantly affected here, and we have significantly worse than average rates of emergency hospital admissions for COPD at the local hospital, for cardiovascular disease, and the number of under 25-year-olds that are admitted to our emergency department for asthma as well. So it's a significant issue nationally, it's a significant issue locally, and then obviously one of the reasons why we're prioritising this. The main source of air pollution, not surprised to know in Portsmouth, is road traffic. There are other reasons and sources, and those are itemised in the paper there, but the main one is traffic, and that's probably the biggest focus there for this forthcoming period against others. So reducing car travel, increasing what we call active travel, which is walking, cycling, bus, using the train and so on, are all obviously priorities to ensure that we can make a real difference for our community. So actions then to tackle that. So we've got a multi-agency air quality and active travel board that was established back in February. That has met several times. I think it meets monthly. We've conducted a mapping exercise to map the actions that individual institutions are taking and to seek best practice across those institutions and really just do a bit of a share and learn. We had a 2-hour workshop with members in September, so just recently, where we developed a delivery plan for the coming year, and there's several objectives within that, which include public awareness campaign to ensure that our communities are fully aware of the impact of air pollution, the health risks that are linked to air pollution. As part of that, we are seeking to use clinical champions, not just from the hospital, but from primary care, from community care also, particularly to again, part of that awareness campaign, and to support a public engagement on the use of alternative travel across our city as well. We're looking at supporting member organisations to continue to peer support and share good practice, and as we heard last Friday, there's a significant amount of good practice that we can share locally and we can make a real difference on actually. So again, really important event last week, and we've made a commitment also to coordinate our electric vehicle infrastructure so that we can share infrastructure amongst parties as well. So that's a real positive step forward. So then to the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board, again, reminding us that air pollution is the greatest environmental threat to health. We're asking board members for 4 things today, other than noting the report that's in front of you. So 4 things, please, for board members on behalf of their organisations. So first of all, to commit to sharing electric vehicle charging points for staff across member organisations and to make that a real positive, active declaration. Second thing is to commit to producing active travel plans within the next 12 months. Now, some have made good progress, but others have got more to do. But we want all of our anchor institutions and all of our partners to develop their active travel plans within the next 12 months, which will then inform an integrated travel plan for the whole city. So that's the next stage. That's really an important stage. But first of all, we need the individual organisations to work together to develop their own. We're asking all NHS members, not just the hospital, but also community primary care, to commit to providing clinical champions to really promote the direct impact on health. And then we're asking for all partners to also commit to developing staff wellbeing champions also to promote clean air and active travel. And I think if we can commit to those 4 things, which are hopefully easy things to commit to, then we will be making a big step forward in terms of supporting the work of this group and over the course of the next year. And obviously in return for that, obviously, clearly we will keep coming back with regular updates for this board in terms of the real outcomes we'll be able to make for our community as in return for these genuine steps forward that we're making together.
Thank you. Anyone want to have any points into that? Any comments? I just like, it is a really important agenda, and it's not just for air quality and respiratory, but you think of your active travel, it's the effect on obesity and all of the wider things. Mental well-being is better if you're out in the fresh air and things. So I think it is a bigger strategy than even that's in the paper, but very welcomed. So are we happy to commit to those recommendations? Yeah? Yeah, lovely, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Now it's Dominic, for terms of reference for the Health Protection Board.
Thank you, and I will keep it brief because I'm aware we're short of time towards the end of the meeting. So the final item on the agenda around the Health Protection Forum terms of reference. So the Health Protection Board was established in 2020 in response to the pandemic and met weekly during the pandemic with a range of partners, health and other partners around the table. It was invaluable, really, supporting the other health protection structures in the system. Now that we've moved to a new phase of living with COVID, we need a refresh of the board and moving towards a more of an all hazards approach. So the three purposes really of the board, in terms of health protection practice, the aims are to prevent, assess and mitigate threats and risks to human health arising from both communicable diseases but also environmental hazards as well. Things like chemical hazards, natural events, heat waves, flooding, etc. Secondly, the purpose is delivery of health protection services really needs that close partnership working across a number of partners, not just those charged with it as their day-to-day business. Not just the UK Health Security Agency, the NHS, but also local government partner organisations, the police, fire and so on. And so the Health Protection Board really aims to offer that kind of local platform for information sharing between those agencies and, if necessary, taking coordinated action on those health threats. And as to reflect that information sharing purpose, we've proposed renaming it a forum rather than a board. So as I said, we're sort of broadening the remit in line with UK Health Security Agency and government guidance to include an all hazards approach, including not just COVID, which we'll continue to work on, but also all communicable diseases, including growth and spread of antimicrobial resistance, and including those environmental hazards that I mentioned, chemical, biological, radiological, and those also outlined in the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Local Resilience Forum Risk Register that include, but are not limited to, flooding, heat waves, poor air quality and low temperatures and excess cold. So the terms of reference includes a membership. Since the publication of the papers for this board meeting, we'd like to add Health Watch to that list to make sure that patient voices are adequately represented, and the accountability remains the same of the forum that would come to this board and its statutory role to bring together key partners in the local health system.
Thank you. Is everyone happy with that? Any comments or questions? No, I think we're very happy with that. Thank you. And that, with 1 minute to spare, brings us to the end of the agenda. Thank you for all of the efforts going into the agenda items today. Very interesting conversations. And the date of the next meeting is, I can't remember, is it on the bottom? Yeah, it's not on here. 15th of February, I believe, so we'll see you all then. Thank you very much.